Should we start? Okay. Cool, guys. I think we're going to get started here. So as you probably already know, today's topic will be the importance of revenue management and dynamic pricing for, will be a little British-themed, holiday lets. Today we'll be covering a little bit of basic hotel and airline pricing strategy and how that differs from the vacation rental market. More specifically, why vacation rental pricing is so unique. The importance and need for hyperlocal demand analysis. The human element for optimization along with software. Using quality data to make decisions. The need for customization for both your market and listing portfolio. As well as take a quick look at some London-specific data. Then I'll open it up to any questions. But this is a very small and intimate room, so feel free to jump in if you have questions. It's meant to be a presentation and conversation at the same time. So we'll start with hotel and airline pricing strategy. So my boss actually came from the hotel and airline space. And there's a lot of similarities on the macro level in terms of strategy when it comes to yield and revenue management. But taking a look at hotels specifically, historically they've been doing it for 2 to 3 decades, so have some of the largest airlines as well. And they are afforded the luxury of having a lot bigger budget in terms of R&D for various projects like yield and revenue management. So if you look at some of the largest airlines like American Airlines, Hyatt, they do all their internal pricing in-house, which is one of the reasons why they were able to take advantage of this strategy decades before the vacation rental market. And secondly, they're also afforded the luxury of having both one individual owner of the entire hotel or even franchise, as well as the airline, so they care about the average ADR of 300 pieces of fairly identical inventory. And the argument can be made that not every hotel room is the same, not every airline seat is the same, and you're actually seeing them start to optimize even on top of that, where airlines are charging you more for exit rows and more for rows towards the front of the plane and more for corner rooms or oceanfront view rooms. That being said, there's still dozens of pieces identical inventory that they are allowed to or can use to make informed decisions on what demand and supply is in the market. But now we're going to quickly cover why this is dangerous for vacation rental managers. So who out here has heard of either of these companies? Ideas, Duetto. It's always interesting to ask a room of vacation rental managers. A lot of them haven't heard of these, and they're both multi-billion-dollar companies in the pricing space for hotels and airlines. Duetto, I think, just eclipsed $1 billion market value. So these are some companies, like I said, airlines and hotels often do it in-house, but some of the smaller chains actually do employ pricing software companies to help their revenue managers make informed decisions and add to their bottom line. So now we'll quickly touch on why vacation rental pricing is so unique. One, you have to deal with the expectations of your clients, being the property owners. They all think that their little snowflake property is worth way more than it generally is in terms of market value. Two, using your own internal inventory. There's some risk in that because if it takes you 30% of your inventory being sold for a weekend 9 months out, you're clearly underpriced for that 30%, which is not going to leave those homeowners that got booked at the 30% incredibly happy, as well as the quantity of and the uniqueness of listings. So most managers have everything from a studio or a 1-bedroom up to an 8-bedroom in their portfolio. They differ in quality and size and location. So it's not even apples to apples in terms of demand because for holidays, larger places in San Francisco is a great example actually. 6 bedrooms in San Francisco, there's actually a giant increase in demand for holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas. But there's an oversupply for 1 and 2 bedrooms because most people aren't coming to San Francisco by themselves during the holiday period. So we actually started as a property management company in San Francisco about 4.5 years ago. And my boss coming from hotels and airlines was looking for a software solution to use to price the inventory. One didn't exist at the time. So we actually built this tool internally to manage our 20 properties in the San Francisco region. We use 3 primary variables when looking at the macro market demand with a heavy emphasis on forward-looking demand. And when I say demand, it's availability, which is inclusive of both supply and demand. because supply can differ greatly, especially with the proliferation of these OTAs, especially in urban markets. We'll see supply swing 50% in a weekend alone just because of the arbitrage for a big event like the Super Bowl or the Pope is coming to town, stuff like that. So another really important thing when it comes to vacation rentals is hyperlocal demand analysis, because even within London alone, demand can differ monumentally from one part of town to the other. And those are a result of things like local conferences, maybe a music festival. Whatever is bringing the demand to that part of the city needs to be recognized specifically within that part of the city and not the market as a whole. Because you'll still see, if you take the city as a whole and it's a big event, that there is demand, but it might be 80% in one neighborhood and only 40% in another neighborhood. So, like the Pope example, as demand changes, so too does supply. For both events as well as regulations or the lack thereof. In 2013, Osaka and Melbourne actually tripled in terms of the number of vacation rentals they had because hosts realized how profitable it was to use Airbnb as an entrepreneurial endeavor, causing a vast oversupply. Similar, when the Pope visited Philadelphia, we saw that market rise from 1,600 Airbnbs to 3,500 for that weekend alone. So any of our hosts that had places in Philadelphia, we told them to dramatically drop prices as a result of that increase in supply. Most ignored us and then didn't get booked. So I want to put a heavy emphasis on how any dynamic pricing software solution is not the end-all, be-all solution by itself, but is intended to be used alongside with intelligent revenue managers to help them make informed decisions based on data. Similar, again, to quote hotels and airlines, you have revenue analysts at these hotels and airlines making decisions utilizing software. It helps them automate their job to make better decisions to capitalize on year-over-year lifts in revenue. So using quality data is probably one of the largest reasons most property managers are not effectively doing yield and revenue management to the degree that they can. And there's quality data in two sides of the equation, both internal and external. Internal is great, especially historical stuff, for making generalizations about areas and individual listings. So historical data gives you a rough estimate of what you can expect. It can help you with projections. It can help you with sales. It can help you in establishing what the starting point or price for any individual listing is based on your own comps. And it also gives insight to why a listing might have underperformed in a given year. Another great example is along the entire Florida Panhandle, as well as the whole southeast region of the United States. They were thrashed by hurricanes last September and October. A lot of the homes weren't destroyed, but people didn't travel there during the hurricane. So those tend to be the third and fourth or fifth largest months in terms of demand. Last year, it was pretty much non-existent. And then we get to external data, which is what we can actually take advantage of as vacation rental managers and do better than hotels and airlines, because the Ritz-Carlton might have 300 rooms and 2 or 3 hotels within a city, but they still have less than 1,000 listings that they're making informed decisions upon. Whereas the London market has 40,000 listings, Paris 60,000. And if you break that down even by neighborhood, you have a larger data set and sample to know how the market's reacting to any given point, any future date. Again, important to take into account the supply and demand side, because I think London also doubled in 2 to 3 years between 2010 and 2013, 2014. And then also demand changes for events year over year, which is why it's very difficult to accurately predict how to price if you don't use forward-looking data, because July 4th, for example, which is American Independence Day, falls on a Wednesday. People only get that one specific day off, so when it falls on a Friday or a Monday, that weekend is always super high demand. But when it falls on a Wednesday, people aren't afforded the ability to travel midweek. So the impact of events, either for holidays and or even any type of conference, may change year over year. Just want to touch a little bit on the customization of your portfolio and market. The onus is on the property manager themselves to figure out what their strategy is and how they interact with homeowners and how much flexibility they have in both raising and dropping rates. Some contracts don't allow individual managers to do so. If you're one of those managers, I'd highly recommend trying to really push the boundaries in terms of a max and minimum price that you're allowed to charge. See massive upticks in occupancy if you're even willing to drop 20% year over year than what you charged for a month that you only attained, say, 30% occupancy last year. So a couple ways to do this, and there's various tactics specific to each manager. But a couple of things we've seen managers effectively put into place are things like last-minute discounting, which is actually the inverse of what airlines do, because they're raising prices last minute. I just took the train from Paris and had to pay way too much money because I booked it the day before. They're raising prices because they know that business travelers are the ones primarily doing the last-minute stuff in the much deeper pockets. When it comes to vacation rental managers, we're trying to fill in the gaps for any last-minute availabilities. And how do you do so? Drop prices. In VRMA Europe, there was a session that was like an 8 or 9 PowerPoint session about how to increase bookings during low season. There's really only one answer to that, and it's drop prices. It's just how far are you willing to and have to drop to get that booking. Other things like seasonal min and max prices. As a revenue manager myself, I kind of really dislike a maximum price in any sense of it. But some managers like to put on bumpers, both either for contractually or peace of mind. And then other things like orphan nights and minimum stays, where you might have gaps between two existing reservations that are traditionally a lot more difficult to fill, because when they're searching your direct website or even the OTAs, the chances that they put in a date for that short of a stay tends to be a lot lower. How can you incentivize people to book that? By undercutting the market and discounting for orphan nights specifically. So I want to take a look at London, and it's exemplary of why we account for 3 main primary factors within our system specifically, and a lot of sophisticated managers are doing on their own. Everyone, I assume, here has heard of Vacasa. If you take a look at their pricing charts, you'll see a very similar trend to this, where they're accounting for, one, seasonality, which in London is actually fairly consistent. We see massive swings in, say, like Destin, Florida, or even like Tuscany or Costa Rica, where you're going from 80%, 90% occupancy during high season, and then for holidays, all the way down to 10, 20% occupancy during low season. So how we account for that is actually by determining the magnitude of the seasonality curve. And this touches on all 3 points, both seasonality, day of week, and local events. Your market is basically the one to dictate the magnitude of each of those factors when it comes to pricing strategy. So one, we see that London is fairly flat, excluding some crappy months in August and September, as well as the two most famous sets of 2 weeks of the year, the first 2 weeks of December and the first 2 weeks of January, where no one can really get anyone to go anywhere for some reason. And we even see that in ski towns. It's really weird. Even though there's snow, no one really travels right after the New Year very much. Clearly, New Year's is the largest event in London specifically. During high season being summer, we're seeing 80% plus. And then these random up and downs you see right here, that's day of week. So these are weekends being booked, probably travelers coming from mainland Europe or driving in from the countryside. And you'll see day of week be pretty consistent across the entire year. And so just wanted to point out that not every single stay that's getting this 65% occupancy is a week-long stay. So there's clear arbitrage to actually get a booking and ensure that you have a reservation during that 60% when 40% of the market is not getting a reservation. So you want to attempt to be as flat as possible in terms of your availability when it comes to pricing strategy. Any London managers know what goes on in February, first week of February? I actually don't know, but didn't look that up. And what's important is we actually, when we're identifying events, it's not predictive in terms of we know that there's this holiday or whatnot, and so we're going to raise prices a certain percentage. But we just see that if there's 150 3 bedrooms in Camden and 90 of them already rented out for a weekend 4 months in advance, we're reacting to that data and seeing that there's suppressed inventory during that period, and therefore we can raise prices because it's a popular demand time based on the delta to that lead date. And lastly, the other thing, the oddity I want to point out is events, which is very difficult to price, like I said, because it can fall on a different day of the year. The impact for an event can differ. And so the most accurate way to predict events, and actually it is what hotels and airlines do, they don't care what's causing the demand spike. Could be a 500-person wedding in a town that only has 200 vacation rentals. But how you identify that is by looking at what's still available at any given point in time in the future. So just kind of flew through a lot of that, so I'm going to open it up to questions, actually.
What sources of external data do you use?
Yes. Are we getting a microphone? Cool. He asked, what sources of external data do we use? So at Beyond Pricing specifically, we access data from partners, including Airbnb, HomeAway, Booking.com, and Expedia, as well as the entire HomeAway family suite, because how they're organized, it's important to factor in the regional brands that they bought, like Fiwo Direct, Arbitel France, et cetera, Stays down in Australia. Stumped you all? Yes.
So you mentioned about kind of the power of a human working together.
Yes.
With the machine. So
Correct.
So could you dive a bit more into what is successful, the kind of partnership look like between human and machine?
Absolutely. So similar to how hotel revenue managers are looking at pacing, we find confirmed bookings the best metric to determine how a listing is booking up or not. So say we had two bedrooms right across the street from here. One was recently remodeled and it's on the 8th floor. One has furniture from the 80s and it's on the 1st floor. If we set the starting point for price fluctuations on both, the market is going to decide which one's more valuable, and you'll see that the newly upgraded one gets a lot more confirmed reservations, pacing it too quick. So it might receive 5 reservations in a week for a total of 30 days. You don't really want to book 30 days in a 7-day period, excluding if it's a brand new listing. But if it's not, you don't want to book way over in advance. So the human element to that would be identifying, hey, pacing is too quick. We need to raise prices across the board for this specific listing because the market itself is telling us this is really valuable. Inversely, the listing that is not quite as nice has no confirmed bookings in the first 2 weeks of you running it. You know that prices across the board are way too high for that listing, and to even get any reservations at all, you need to bring that down. So there's various strategies depending on the company, in which case the revenue manager can make informed decisions. We've found confirmed reservations along with the quantity of days of those confirmed reservations is the best metric for the human component in a management company to make informed decisions. And we have a few internal revenue managers that kind of help out with that general pricing strategy, but it's definitely unique to each manager and market.
What do you find is the biggest impact, like you just said with interiors?
Yes.
Something had just been redone up. What are the top kind of handful of things that do impact the price increases?
Yes, so the question is, what factors generally impact price either increase or decrease the most? There's a variety of things, everything from reviews are definitely very important, especially if you're pretty OTA heavy. Always having good pictures with a clean interior is incredibly helpful. But the managers we see that are most successful just have incredibly sound operations and great ways to bring on new inventory, where they'll actually require homeowners to remodel the place. They'll require a professional photographer to come in. If it's a mansion, they might have drone photography. I mean, this all ties into revenue management is not just specifically prices. It's also inclusive of distribution, minimum stay schemas, and those all differ again by market. And sorry to keep going back to that. But it is very specific, and marrying like your local knowledge with whatever strategy you have. For example, Hilton Head, North Carolina, they have 7-day Saturday to Saturday check-ins every single year because their demographic is families that come back every single year, and they can get that. I would highly recommend against a 7-night minimum stay with a Saturday-only check-in because you're just hiding yourself from so many people. But that market specifically gets away with it because they have 100% occupancy every June and July. In which case, I want to make the argument if they drop it to 3, you can really push prices on those weekends when there's higher demand because especially as the younger generation grows a bit older and uses a lot more online OTAs, they're not going to be as used to the calendar printed of weekly prices for checking in on Saturday. It's just not how society travels that strictly anymore.
So does the tool recommend what the minimum stay should be as well as what the nightly rate should be?
It doesn't. That's more of on the onus on you to kind of pick what your strategy should be. I personally think one-night minimum stays are ideal if you have the operational capacity to deal with that. You can put a premium on doing so by having a high cleaning fee. So that high cleaning fee is dispersed as the stay gets longer. So as long as you're covering your costs and operationally have that, excluding events that you know people are coming into town for more than a few days, guaranteeing that. So I generally recommend a 3 or 2-night minimum stay for high demand weekends, a 3 or 4 for major holidays where there's families going to be traveling, and then everything around low and mid-season, 1 night. That's what I would use if I was running my own management company. We actually gave away the inventory that we started as to some partners in San Francisco, so we're no longer managing, just in the pricing world now.
Does it respond to, I guess, patchy availability in pricing? So, I mean, my company works with individual homeowners who just sometimes rock up, disappear. It's all kind of very, very ad hoc. So will the pricing take that into account to help fill the gaps?
Yeah, there's a couple different strategies there. One, say you have a mid-week gap consistently, like Monday through Wednesday. We would need the day of week variable to have a magnitude strong enough so that you're getting booked at the weekends at the same rate as you are the weekdays. So proactively, by using an algorithm, you can try to avoid that issue. And then some of the customization stuff allow you to fill stuff that falls and slips through the cracks. So things like last-minute discounting. So if you do cover costs and still make a certain percentage on top of whatever your minimum is, I'd highly recommend, especially midweek, putting a last-minute discounting scheme on so it's pulling it down in the minimum so you actually get confirmed reservations. Additionally, things like orphan nights, depends on how long and how many orphan nights you have, or sets of orphan nights, I should say. So discounting most aggressively if you have a 1-night minimum stay for a 1-night orphan night. Also a 2-night orphan night on a Friday or Saturday, you might want to put in some logic to ignore that because that's still a high demand period. Be lucky to get a Sunday through Thursday reservation, then a Monday through Wednesday reservation, have 2 weekends available. I don't think it happens very often. But these are some of the more intricate things that are decided on a manager-manager basis.
I don't know if you want to answer this one, but
Yes.
We're just going through a software selection exercise at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and have looked at Duetto and ideas.
Yes.
They're way too big and complicated and expensive.
Yes.
For what I think. So that leaves Price Labs and Beyond Pricing on the short list.
Hey.
Totally different pricing models to us.
Yes.
And why is Beyond Pricing worth paying a commission for?
Every single one of our clients is ROI positive. If not, our return on investment positive. So if we're not making you at least, what do you take as a manager, 20%? Roughly.
Yeah, roughly. Well,
Roughly.
it's hard to say because we own most of the portfolio.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So a traditional manager takes about 20%. And with that, if they're covering the cost for their individual owners, then we would have to have at least a 5% or more than a 5% increase in lift to make that a investment that's worth it. But average property manager in the United States, and we have a few over a couple thousand, are roughly averaging 18% year over year. And that seems like a crazy marketing number, but it's true because of a lot of the strategies I talked about. And so many managers don't realize that even when you have a shoulder season of 40%, if you're able to capture consistently the majority of that 40% when all these individuals who are bad students in terms of pricing, there's a lot of arbitrage for lifts in occupancy, which is, especially if you own the place, huge opportunity for maximizing revenue.
So just so I understand, your charges are 3% of booking fees, is that right?
1%. 1%.
1%? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
And the return...
Sorry, not to be a sales pitch. I apologize, everyone.
No, it's just really...
Yeah.
But the return is 18%?
Yes, generally. But most managers are only taking 20%, so that's like a 3.5x return, if that makes sense.
80% increase on,
Yes.
on everything.
Year over year, for large established brands in the United States. The majority of our clients are in the US. We're in 1,000 markets worldwide, but we integrated with V12, Escapia, Streamline, Guesty, who all have a lot of presence in the United States. So that's been kind of the focus and concentration as we've grown. But the data is consistent across the world. So V12 and Escapia are very specific to HomeAway in the US for the most part. And we have quite a few clients on those platforms.
And on Rentals United as well?
Yes, so Rentals United is as a channel manager. We are partners and work with them. We try not to put a lot of emphasis on integrating with the channel manager specifically unless the manager has a custom PMS, primarily because we'd rather push rates into wherever your core sort database is that is already set up with the distribution channels. So integrating a pricing service into a channel manager is a bit of a workaround. We're good at workarounds. We also sync directly to Airbnb, directly to VRBO, HomeAway, out of necessity because some of these large OTAs, like HomeAway software, don't make it easy to put prices and or availability on Airbnb, so have to get creative sometimes in how we distribute prices. But the most clean way to do so is to have an integration directly in your core PMS.
Why is that?
Because the distribution channel is already connected there, so then you have either price parity if you'd like it, or you can actually add a percentage markup based on the OTA's feed from whatever your core prices are in terms of nightly rate. And if you're getting direct bookings, you probably want to make that the cheapest to incentivize people to book direct so that you get their customer information, can retarget them more often, remarket to them, etc.
So if you have a channel manager,
Yes.
do you work with people that do that and you just go direct to the marketing channels, or do you not work with people that work with channel managers?
No, we do work with people with channel managers. We can either push prices directly to the channel, and you can tell the manager just to handle availability and not pricing. We don't touch availability, so we are not a channel manager ourselves in that capacity. I think most would agree that primary channel management is availability syncing. They do price syncing as well, but they're not creating prices. It's your prices from your PMS, whatever that might be, which is why we like to push into the core system.
And do you create prices?
Yes. 365 rates per listing based on your existing prices, historical stats, and mostly forward-looking market data.
What other, I'm curious, you mentioned most of the PMSs are US-based. What sort of PMSs are you looking at integrating it in Europe?
Yeah, it's great question. Guesty dominates Europe pretty much from what I've seen, which is cool. There's a lot of long tail in Europe. It's a lot more fractionalized than the US. Say 80% of US managers use those primary three that I mentioned. In Europe, we see a long tail, so everyone from HostAway to Super Control, we just started integrations with, and countless others, Vreezy, Booking Sync.
Are you already integrating with Breezy?
Yes and no. I'll talk to you after. Yes. The integration was built a while back, but it was put on pause, but it's gotten picked back up. So.
What about 365 Villas?
No. Where are they based out of?
Barcelona, I think.
Barcelona. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, the landscape here, because I think it was, Kigo raised prices pretty dramatically when they were acquired by RealPage, and so I think that annoyed enough managers of decent size to go and build their own custom property management software systems, which I think is a good idea if you're Vacasa and you're like a very competent technological company. If you're more of an operations and management company is your forte, getting into the tech space is potential money rabbit hole. So I do see a lot of custom property management software systems in Europe, and I think there's pros and cons. I heard one manager say that like some of the tax implications and currency exchange is too difficult to do in one PMS, one third-party PMS, so that's the reason they built their own. Others want control, like Vive, for example, in London here, built a custom PMS. They were kind of allowed to do so because they had relationships to integrate directly with channels, being HomeAway, Booking.com, straight into their custom PMS as a result of probably the Wyndham investment helped out with that biz dev opportunity. Awesome. Well, I think I should actually stop. Vanessa's going to get mad at me if I go over. So thanks, everyone, for the time. Feel free to come over by the booth.